The night I found out, I was standing in his kitchen in his shirt, making coffee like I lived there. I had learned how he liked it. 2 sugars, no cream, stirred exactly 4 times. I had learned that without him asking. I had just started doing it one morning and never stopped. That is what scared me later. How quietly I had rearranged myself around a man who never once asked me to. His phone was on the counter. Face up. I was not trying to read it. I want you to know that. I am not that woman. But the name on the screen was large, and the kitchen was quiet, and my eyes moved before my brain could stop them. Dana. And under the name, for words that made the coffee cup slip in my hand. He does this every time. I stood there. The coffee was still brewing. The shirt smelled like his cologne. And somewhere in the back of my mind, something that had been whispering to me for weeks got very, very loud. This is a story of how the most intense love of my life was also the most dangerous thing that ever happened to me, and how I almost did not make it out as myself. Somewhere deep inside you, there's a version of love you've been waiting to feel again. Maybe it was a touch, a look across a room, a moment you never forgot, or a heart that never fully healed. Hold on to that feeling, because this story was made for exactly that place inside you. Welcome home to Miss Cheese Stories. If you're returning, thank you. If you're new, you were meant to find us. Subscribe. Don't skip. Don't rush. The magic is waiting for you. Now, let's begin. 3 months before that kitchen moment, I was the most focused I had ever been in my life. I was 34 years old. I had a corner office on the 19th floor of Harlow & Webb, one of the most respected firms in Houston. I had a reputation that took me 8 years to build. I wore like armor, and I kept it polished. I was not looking for anybody. The Ashford case landed on my desk on a Tuesday. My senior partner, Marcus Webb, called me into his office, slid a folder across his desk, and said the words every attorney in my position wants to hear. This one's yours, Journee. Vertex Capital had hired us to challenge Grant Ashford's acquisition of Pinnacle Tech. The deal was worth $400 million, and it had the kind of legal complexity that gave junior associates nightmares. 11 weeks of preparation, thousands of pages. I knew that case better than I knew my own apartment. I walked into that conference room ready for a fight. The Ashford Group's legal team was already seated, 6 of them, all watching me with that particular stillness that told me they had already decided I was not a threat. I set my files down, pulled out my chair, did not say a word. Then Grant Ashford walked in. I felt him before I saw him. Something shifted. The men at the table adjusted, without realizing it. And then he was there at the head of the table, dark suit, no tie, and hazel eyes that moved across the room, and found me like they were looking for something specific. He was not what I expected. I do not know what I expected. Older maybe. Softer. The kind of man that money makes comfortable and comfort makes slow. Grant Ashford looked like he had built everything with his hands and dared the world to take it. He looked at me for 3 seconds too long. Then he sat down. For the next 3 hours, I dismantled his legal team with every document I had spent 11 weeks preparing. I was precise. I was relentless. I watched his attorneys exchange glances across the table. I watched Marcus on my side, trying not to smile. Grant Ashford never flinched. He sat at the head of that table and watched me work like I was something worth studying. Every time I looked up, his eyes were already there. Not aggressive. Not challenging, just steady and completely focused. It made me uncomfortable in a way I did not want to examine. We broke for lunch at noon. I stayed at the table, eating a sandwich I had packed, going over notes. Most of his team left the room. I assumed he did too. You and a Spellman. I looked up. Grant Ashford was still in his seat. He had a bottle of water and was watching me with that same focused quiet. Excuse me? Spelman College, then Harvard Law. He said it like he was confirming something he already knew. You graduated top of your class. You passed the bar in 2 states the same year. I put my pen down slowly. You research me. I research everyone I'm about to face in a room. He tilted his head slightly. I just paid more attention to yours. I looked at him for a moment. That's supposed to be a compliment? It's supposed to be honest. He took a sip of water. You're the best attorney in this room, including mine. I thought you should know I know that. I did not know what to do with that, so I picked my pen back up. That won't change my position on the Pinnacle acquisition. I know. He almost smiled. I didn't say it to change your position. He left before I could respond. The afternoon session was harder. His team came back sharper, like someone had talked to them at lunch. I still held my ground, but I felt the shift. Grant barely spoke during the legal arguments. He just watched. And every time I made a point that landed, something moved in his expression, not frustration. Something closer to satisfaction, like he was enjoying watching me win against him. I drove home, that evening running the whole day through my head. By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, I had talked myself out of whatever had been humming in my chest all afternoon. He was opposing counsel. He was a billionaire with resources I had not fully mapped yet. He was a complication. I went inside, changed into sweats, called my best friend Kezia, and told her about the case. "What does he look like?" she asked immediately. "Kezia, I'm asking for legal purposes. Hazel eyes, quiet, the kind of man who makes you feel like you're the only person in the room, and you don't know if that's a gift or strategy. Silence. Journee, I know. Baby, that's a red flag in a really good suit." I laughed and told her she was dramatic. I made myself a plate of leftover sweet potato from Sunday dinner at Mama's, put on her playlist, and went over my notes until midnight. 3 days later, Grant Ashford called my office directly, not his attorney. "I want to settle," he said. "Then have your team call mine. I want to talk to you." "Mr. Ashford, that's not how this works." "Have dinner with me." I pulled the phone from my ear and looked at it, then put it back. "I'm going to pretend you didn't just say that." Journee, the first time he used my name. My whole chest did something I did not give it permission to do. "I'm not asking you to compromise the case. I'm asking for one conversation. As two people, not two attorneys. That distinction doesn't exist when we're on opposite sides of a $400 million acquisition. Then let me make you a different offer." His voice dropped half a step. Calm, deliberate, like a man who had thought this through before dialing. "Leave Harlow and Webb. Come work for me. Exclusively. I'll pay you 3 times what you're making. Give you full autonomy, and this case goes away." My hand tightened on the phone. "You're asking me to switch sides. I'm asking you to pick the winning one. That's incredibly arrogant. I know." A pause. "Is it working? Goodbye, Mr. Ashford." I hung up, sat very still for approximately 45 seconds. Then I called Marcus and told him what had happened. He laughed and said Grant Ashford did that kind of thing, that it never worked, that I should not give it another thought. I did not give it another thought until 9:47 that same evening, when my apartment intercom buzzed and a voice I already recognized said simply, "It's Grant." I stood in my kitchen for a full 10 seconds before I pressed the button to let him up. I do not know why I did that. I have asked myself that question many times since. The most honest answer I have is that something in me already knew this was not a man who would be kept out by an intercom. He stood in my doorway in a dark jacket, no briefcase, no assistant, looking like a man who had made a decision and acted on it without second-guessing himself once. "You hung up on me," he said. "You called my office to offer me a job and asked me to dinner in the same breath." I did. He did not look even slightly apologetic. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. His eyes moved over my face with that same steady focus from the conference room, like he was reading something. "You let me up, Journee." The way he said my name made my spine feel different. "I have 5 minutes," I said. He stepped just inside the doorway, looked around my apartment briefly, then back at me. "I want you working with me, not against me," he said. "Not because of the case. Because I have been in that room with a lot of attorneys, and I have never watched someone work like you work. You're wasted fighting my deals. I want you building them." That's a very smooth way to try to win a lawsuit. The offer stands regardless of what you decide about the case. He reached into his jacket and set a business card on the small table just inside my door. My private number, not the office line. He looked at me one more time, and something moved in his expression that was not professional and not polished and not the performance of a man used to getting what he wanted. It was hunger, real and controlled, but real. "I want you mindless before I'm even inside your world, Journee," he said quietly. "Give me the chance to show you why." He left before I could answer. I stood in my doorway, holding the card. The hallway was already empty. SZA was playing softly from my kitchen speaker. And somewhere in my chest, something I had kept very quiet for a very long time opened one eye. I should have closed it. I did not close it. Quick pause. If you're feeling this story, hype it so others can find it. Comment where you're watching from. Now back to the story. I did not call the number for 5 days. I told myself I was busy. The Pinnacle case was still active. The depositions were scheduled, and I had a reputation to protect. I told myself that a smart woman does not entertain a man on the other side of her most important case. I told myself a lot of things that week. On the 5th day, a delivery arrived at my office. No card, just a box from the most expensive florist in Houston, filled with deep burgundy roses and one small note that said, "Still thinking about the offer." Both of them. Kezia was sitting across from my desk, eating a salad when it arrived. She looked at the flowers, then at me, then back at the flowers. "Both of them," she repeated slowly. "It's nothing. Journee, burgundy roses to your office from a billionaire who showed up at your apartment is not nothing. That is a very specific kind of something." I put the note face down on my desk. He's opposing counsel. For how much longer? I did not answer that because I did not have a clean answer. The Pinnacle case was shifting. Vertex Capital had been making noise about reconsidering their position. Marcus had mentioned it twice that week in a tone that told me something was moving behind the scenes that I had not been told about yet. I put the flowers on the windowsill and went back to work. That evening, Grant texted the number I had not called yet, which meant he had my number from somewhere. That alone should have told me something. The text said simply, "How do you take your coffee?" I stared at it for a long time. Then I texted back, "2 sugars, no cream." He replied, "Noted, nothing else, just that one word." And somehow that single word did more damage than the flowers. The following morning, a coffee arrived at my office before I did. The exact order, warm, with a second note that said, "Good morning, counselor." Kezia found me standing over my desk staring at the cup. "He sent coffee to arrive before you got here," she said flatly. "Yes, which means he found out what time you get in." I picked up the cup. It was perfect. "Yes." Kezia put her bag down slowly. "Journee, I love you. So I need you to hear me when I tell you that a man who researches what time you arrive at work before you've even agreed to dinner is not being romantic. He is being strategic. You don't know that. I know that flowers plus apartment visit plus pre-time coffee in 4 days is not a man who is taking his time. That is a man running a very focused play." I heard her. I want to say that clearly. I heard every word Kezia said to me that morning. I just did not feel it, yet the way she needed me to feel it. Because the coffee was perfect and the note was warm and nobody had paid that kind of attention to me in longer than I wanted to admit out loud. That is the thing nobody tells you about love bombing. It does not feel like an attack. It feels like rain after a very long drought. It feels like finally. I called his number that afternoon. He picked up on the first ring. "I knew you'd call today," he said. "You couldn't have known that. You strike me as a woman who needs exactly 5 days to make a decision she's already made." A pause. Was I wrong? My jaw tightened. "Dinner," I said. "One dinner, not a job negotiation. Just 2 people. Don't make me regret this." He took me to a restaurant in Midtown that I had walked past 100 times and never been inside. Small, quiet, the kind of place that does not need a sign because everyone who needs to know already knows. We were seated in a corner booth away from the other tables, and he ordered a bottle of wine without looking at the menu, which told me he had been here enough to have a preference. He was different outside the conference room. Not softer exactly, but less armored. He asked me about Atlanta, about growing up there, about what made me want law. He listened in that way that some people only perform, but he actually did. The kind of listening where someone holds eye contact and does not reach for their phone once and responds to the specific thing you just said and not a general version of it. I told him about my grandmother Rose. about how she used to say that a woman who knows her own mind is the most powerful thing God ever made. About Sunday dinners where the mac and cheese was a whole event, and the peach cobbler was Grandma Rose's secret that she took to her grave, and every woman in the family had spent years trying to reverse engineer. He laughed at that. A real laugh, low and warm and surprised out of him. She sounds like someone I would have been scared of, he said. Everyone was scared of her, I said. She had this way of looking at you like she could see the version of you that you were trying to hide. Something moved across his face at that, quick and gone. Some people would find that uncomfortable. Most people did. What about you? I found it safe, I said. When someone really sees you, you don't have to work so hard. He was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved over my face slowly. I see you, Journee, he said. It was simple, quiet, and it went straight through every wall I had. We stayed at that restaurant for 3 hours. When he drove me home, he walked me to my door and did not try to come inside. He stood in the hallway and looked at me with that focused, steady gaze and said, "Same time next week?" "I haven't decided yet." "You've already decided." He smiled once, brief and certain. "Good night, Journee." I closed my door and leaned against in the dark. Kezia called 11 minutes later, like she had a sensor on me. How is it? Good. Define good. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor with my back against the door. He listened, Kez, like actually listened. And he's funny. Not performing funny, actually funny. And he walked me to my door and didn't try anything, and just said same time next week like he already knew. A long silence. And did he already know? I closed my eyes. Yeah, he already knew. Kezia exhaled. Okay, I'm happy for you. I'm also watching. Those are two things I can do at the same time. I know. Good. Now go to sleep. You have a deposition at 8. 2 weeks later, Marcus called me into his office and told me that Vertex Capital was pulling back. The Pinnacle case was being restructured. My role was shifting from lead to advisory. He said it with a face that was very carefully neutral, which was how Marcus looked when he was not telling me the whole thing. I sat across from him and felt the edges of something I could not name yet. Why? I asked. Client decision, he said. Nothing you did. Marcus. Why? He picked up a pen and set it down. There have been some conversations at the partner level about the optics of your involvement given recent developments. Recent developments, I repeated slowly. You've been seen with Grant Ashford. The room went very quiet. We've had dinner twice, I said carefully. The case is still active. I know that. You know that. He looked at me with something that was almost an apology, but not quite. But perception matters in this business, Journee. You know that too. I left his office and stood in the hallway for a moment with my hand flat against the wall. I did not call Grant to tell him. I did not want to hand him that. I went home and sat with it and turned it over and looked at it from every angle. And here's the thing that I could not shake. The Vertex withdrawal and Marcus's quiet reshuffling of my role had happened within the same 10 days that Grant and I had started seeing each other. The timing was too clean, too convenient, but I had no proof. And I was already 3 dinners in, and something in me had started to feel like sunlight when he was in the room. So I filed the timing away in the back of my mind, and I told myself I was being paranoid. That was the first time I talked myself out of my own instinct for Grant Ashford. It would not be the last. The night I finally introduced him to Kezia was at a rooftop bar in downtown Houston. I had not planned it that way. Kezia had shown up because Kezia had a radar, and she used it without shame. She walked in, saw us at the table, and sat down with the energy of a woman who had been preparing for exactly this. Grant charmed her. I will give him that. He was warm and attentive, and he knew how to make a person feel included. He asked Kezia about her work. He laughed at her jokes. He refilled her glass before it was empty. Kezia smiled and laughed and engaged. And when Grant went to the bar to order another round, she leaned across the table and said in a voice designed to carry exactly as far as our table, "He's very good. He's genuine. Baby, those are not mutually exclusive." She looked toward the bar where Grant was standing, relaxed and easy, already talking to the bartender like they were old friends. He's good at making people feel chosen. That's a skill. I'm just asking you to notice it's a skill. Kezia, I'm not saying don't do this. I'm saying keep your eyes open while you do it. She squeezed my hand once. You have good instincts. Promise me you'll trust them. I promised her. I believed myself when I said it. Grant came back with the drinks and a story about the bartender's sister that made us both laugh. And the evening wrapped up warm and easy and full of the kind of comfort that makes you think you are exactly where you're supposed to be. He drove me home, walked me to my door. This time when I opened it, I did not close it right away. He looked at me, that steady, consuming look. I'm not going anywhere, Journee, he said quietly. I believe that too. And then 3 days later, I was at his penthouse for the first time, and his phone lit up on the kitchen counter while I was making coffee. And I saw a name I did not recognize and 4 words that landed like a stone in still water. Dana. He does this every time. I stood there with the coffee cup in my hand, and the morning light coming through those massive windows, and every warm and certain thing I had felt over the past few weeks developed a crack, so thin I almost could not see it. Almost. I almost did not take him to Sunday dinner. I stood in my bathroom that morning doing my edges, looking at myself in the mirror, having a full internal argument with no winner. We had been seeing each other for 6 weeks. 6 weeks was not long enough to bring someone to Mama Caldwell's table. Mama Caldwell's table was not a casual thing. It was an evaluation. It was a room full of women who had seen everything and forgotten nothing, and loved you enough to tell you the truth even when you did not ask for it. But Grant had asked 3 times. Not pressuring, just consistent. And something in me wanted to see what happened when the man, who made me feel like the center of the universe, stood in the middle of the realest room I knew. I think part of me was hoping they would love him. I think another part of me was hoping they would see something I was missing. He picked me up at noon in a black Range Rover, dressed in a camel-colored button-down and dark trousers, looking like he had thought carefully about the balance between impressive and approachable. He had flowers for my mother, tulips, not roses. I noticed that. He had done research. Are you nervous? He asked as we pulled out of my complex. No, I said. He glanced at me once. You've smoothed your skirt 4 times since you got in the car. I put my hands in my lap. I'm not nervous. He smiled and kept driving. Mama's house in 3rd Ward was already full when we arrived. I could hear Frankie Beverly through the door before we knocked, which meant Uncle Derek had gotten there first and taken control of the speaker. The smell hit me the moment the door opened. Collard greens and smoked turkey, mac and cheese that had been in the oven since morning, cornbread in the cast iron skillet, and something sweet underneath it all that meant Mama had made her bread pudding. My mother opened the door and looked at Grant Ashford for exactly 3 seconds before she smiled and let us in. Her smile was warm. Her eyes were doing something else entirely. Mrs. Caldwell, Grant said, extending the tulips. Journee talks about you constantly. I can see why. Mama took the flowers. Come on out of the heat. The living room was full. Cousins, aunts, Uncle Derek already holding court near the television. Everyone looked. Nobody was subtle about it. Grant moved through the room with ease that surprised me, shaking hands, learning names, bending to speak to my little cousin Amara at her level when she tugged his sleeve to show him something on her tablet. I watched him from across the room and felt that sunlight feeling again. Kezia appeared at my elbow from nowhere. He's working the room, she said quietly. He's being friendly. I know what friendly looks like. I also know what a man who has done this before looks like. She ate a piece of cornbread. Where is he from again? Boston originally. Moved to Houston 12 years ago. Family? He doesn't talk about them much. Kezia looked at me. That's a thing, Journee. When a grown man doesn't talk about where he came from, that's a thing. I did not have time to respond because Mama called us to the table. Grandma Rose was already seated. She was 81 years old, small and precise, with silver locks pinned at the back of her head and eyes that had been collecting information about people since before most of us were born. She had her hands folded on the table, and she was watching Grant the way she watched everything. Quietly, completely. Grant sat across from her. He did not seem unsettled by her attention. He met her eyes and nodded respectfully. Mrs. Rose, he said, it's an honor. Grandma Rose said nothing for a moment. You have good manners, she said finally. Her voice was low and even. Manners are easy to learn. A brief silence fell over that end of the table. Grant held her gaze and smiled slightly. "Yes, ma'am. They are." Grandma Rose looked at him one more moment. Then she picked up her fork and began eating and did not say anything else to him for the rest of the meal. I felt something move through me that I could not name. Dinner was loud and warm and full of the kind of conversation that goes in 6 directions at once. Grant held his own. He talked football with Uncle Derek, asked Mom about her garden, listened to my cousin Tasha's whole story about her job situation with genuine patience. He ate 2 plates and told Mama the mac and cheese was the best thing he had eaten in years. Mama said thank you and refilled his glass, and her eyes kept doing that other thing. After dinner, the men moved to the living room, and the women moved to the kitchen, which was the way it had always been in this house. And the moment Grant was out of earshot, Mama turned from the sink and looked at me. "He's charming," she said. "He is. Journee." She said my name the way she had said it my whole life when she needed me to stop performing and listen. Charming is not the same as safe. "Mama, you just met him." "I've met his kind before." She handed me a dish to dry. "He looks at you like you belong to him already. You notice that?" I had noticed it. I had told myself it was intensity, passion, that it meant I mattered to him. "Some men look at a woman like she's something they love," Mama said quietly. "And some men look at a woman like she's something they own. The look is almost the same." Almost. I dried the dish and did not answer. "I'm not telling you what to do," she said. "You're a grown woman and you're smart. I'm just telling you what I see." She hugged me before we left. Long and tight, the way she hugged me when she was worried and did not want to say the full weight of it out loud. Grant was quiet on the drive back to my place. Thoughtful. "Your grandmother doesn't like me," he said. "She doesn't know you yet." She looked at me like she already had. He was not offended. He said it with a kind of steady observation that I found myself respecting. "She's sharp. The sharpest person I know." He nodded once and drove. And then after a few minutes he said, "I want to make her like me." "You can't perform your way into Grandma Rose's good opinion," I said. "She just knows things." He glanced at me. Something in his expression I could not fully read. "What does she know about me?" "I don't know yet." He was quiet the rest of the way. That night after he dropped me off, I called Grandma Rose. She answered on the second ring the way she always did, like she had been expecting it. "What did you think?" I asked. A long pause, the kind she took when she was choosing words carefully. "He's a man who needs to be the most important thing in the room," she said. "Right now you're new to him, so you're the room. You're everything." Another pause. "Watch what happens when something else needs to be the most important thing. Watch what he does with that." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. I thought about the Vertex case, about Marcus reshuffling my role in those same 10 days Grant and I had started seeing each other, about the timing I had told myself was paranoia. I thought about Dana, about those 4 words on his phone screen that I had never asked him about because I had not figured out how to ask without showing him how much they had already gotten to me. The following week, Grant took me to a private dinner with 3 of his business partners and their wives. I was the only person at the table who had not known everyone else for years. He introduced me as the most brilliant attorney I have ever faced across a negotiating table, and the warmth that went around that table told me his people loved him the way people love a man who makes everyone feel like they matter. I sat beside him and felt proud and chosen and warm. And then across the restaurant, I saw her. She was tall, polished in the way that money and attention to detail makes a person polished. Dark hair, the kind of beauty that knows exactly what it is doing. She was with a group of women at a table near the window, and she was not looking at our table. But Grant went still beside me, a fraction of a second, almost nothing. I felt it in the arm press against mine. "Who is that?" I asked quietly. He picked up his wine glass. "Someone I used to know." "Used to know how?" He looked at me then, steady and calm, the way he looked when he was about to say something designed to close a door. "It was a long time ago, Journee. It doesn't have anything to do with us." I looked back toward the window. The woman I now understood was Dana had still not looked at our table. But there was something in the precise way she was not looking that told me the not looking was very deliberate. Okay, I said. He squeezed my hand under the table. The dinner continued. The conversation was warm and easy, and by the end of the evening, two of his partners had told me separately how glad they were that Grant had finally found someone real. Finally, one of them said, like there had been something before me that was not real. I filed that away, too. On the drive home, he was attentive and warm, and when we said goodnight, he held my face in both hands and looked at me like I was the only fixed point in his world. You're different from anyone I've ever known, he said. I wanted to ask him what Dana was. I wanted to ask him why her name was still in his phone with a message that said, he does this every time. I wanted to ask him about the Vertex case and Marcus, and the timing that I kept pushing to the back of my mind. I asked none of it. Good night, Grant, I said. He kissed my forehead, slow and deliberate. I went inside and sat in the dark of my living room and listened to quiet and felt a very specific feeling of a woman who knows something is wrong and is not ready to know what it is yet. Somewhere in the city, I imagined Grandma Rose already knew. The call from Marcus came on a Wednesday morning while I was in the middle of reviewing a contract at my desk. He did not open with small talk, which told me everything before the words came. I need you in my office. Now. I walked down the hall and sat across from him and watched him close the door, which he only did when the conversation was something the rest of the floor could not hear. He sat down and folded his hands on the desk and looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between guilty and resigned. The partners met last night, he said. I waited. There's been a decision about your position on the Ashford accounts. My chest went very still. What Ashford accounts? Grant Ashford reached out to the firm 3 weeks ago about bringing us on for his Southeast expansion. It's a significant contract, multi-year. Marcus picked up his pen and set it down the way he always did when he was uncomfortable. The partners feel that given your personal relationship with Mr. Ashford, you have a conflict of interest on anything connected to his business. The room was very quiet. So I'm being removed, I said. You're being reassigned. It's not punitive. Journee, it's procedural. Marcus. I said his name the way my mother said mine, when she needed performance to stop. I brought in 4 of this firm's top 10 clients. I have never had a conflict of interest complaint in 8 years. And now the moment my name is connected to Grant Ashford, I am being reassigned from work I was never even assigned to in the first place. I paused. How did the partners know about my personal relationship? Marcus looked at his desk. And in that look, I had my answer. Who told them? I said. It came up in the partner meeting. Who told them, Marcus? He exhaled slowly. It was raised as a concern by someone invested in the firm's relationship with the Ashford Group. The pieces moved into place with a click I felt in my back teeth. Grant had brought his business to my firm. My firm had a relationship to protect. And the cleanest way to protect it was to make sure I was not in a position to ask uncomfortable questions about how that business was structured or why the timing of his approach to Harlow. And Webb lined up so precisely with the moment he and I started seeing each other. I had been maneuvered, quietly, thoroughly, and with enough layers between the action and the result that I could not point to a single moment and say there, that is where it happened. I stood up. Journee. Marcus stood too. I want you to know I pushed back. I want you to know that. Did you push back hard enough to change the outcome? He said nothing. Then it doesn't matter, Marcus. I picked up my portfolio. It doesn't matter. I drove to the parking garage of a shopping center 4 blocks from the office and sat in my car with both hands on the wheel and the engine running and did not move for 22 minutes. I thought about the first dinner, the way he had listened, the coffee that arrived before I did, the tulips from my mother, because he had researched what would land right. I thought about every warm and chosen feeling I collected over 6 weeks, and I held them up against this moment, and I felt the shape of the thing I had been refusing to see. Grant had not fallen for me in that conference room. Grant had identified me as a threat first, then as something he wanted to absorb rather than oppose. My phone buzzed. A text from him. Dinner tonight? I found a place in the Heights you'll love. I stared at it until the screen went dark. Then I called Kezia. She picked up, and I said nothing for the first few seconds, and she said, "Where are you?" in a voice that had no question in it, only direction And I told her, and she said, stay there. And 20 minutes later, she was pulling up beside me and getting into my passenger seat with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a woman who had been waiting for this call and hated that she had been right. I told her everything. The Vertex case timing, Dana's message, the Ashford accounts at the firm, Marcus's face when he could not tell me who had raised a concern. Kezia listened without interrupting, which was how I knew she understood the weight of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Journee, I need to tell you some things, and I need you to actually hear them this time. I'm hearing you. What Grant has been doing has a name. She turned in the seat to face me. It's called love bombing. The flowers, the pre-timed coffee, the showing up at your door, making you feel like the most seen person in the world in the first few weeks. That's not romance. That's a technique. It's how certain people establish control before you realize control is what they're after. I looked at my coffee cup. The isolation is next, she said, and I want you to think about whether it's already started. How many times in the last 6 weeks have you canceled on me? I did not answer because the answer was 4 times. 4 times in 6 weeks, which was more than the previous year combined. Each time because Grant had already made plans that felt impossible to say no to. He makes plans that overlap yours, Kezia said. Not because he's inconsiderate. Because he's attentive enough to know your schedule and strategic enough to fill the spaces before someone else can. She paused. That's not love, baby. That's an occupation. The word landed hard. And the hot and cold, she continued. Tell me you've noticed the hot and cold. I had noticed it. 3 times over the past 2 weeks, Grant had gone quiet after moments of closeness. Not cold exactly, just suddenly unreachable. A delayed text. A canceled plan with a smooth explanation. And each time I had felt myself leaning toward him harder, trying to get back to the warmth, adjusting myself to recover the feeling. When someone runs hot and cold, Kezia said, your nervous system starts chasing the warmth. You stop noticing you're working for something that used to come freely. That's by design, Journee. Not always conscious, but by design. I pressed my fingers against my eyes. The Dana message, I said, he does this every time. Kezia said it quietly. Someone who knows him well enough to have that stored in their phone, who felt the need to send it. That's not a jealous ex making noise. That's a warning from someone who survived the same thing you're in the middle of. The coffee was cold in my hands. Outside the parking garage the city moved past, ordinary and indifferent. I'm not telling you he doesn't feel something for you, Kezia said. Narcissistic people feel things. They feel deeply. The problem is that what they feel is tangled up with what they need, and what they need is control and validation, and someone whose world revolves around them. She looked at me steadily. You started rearranging your life for him 6 weeks in Journee. That's fast. Think about how different you feel inside when he's warm versus when he's distant. That gap is a hold. I sat with that. She was not wrong. I knew she was not wrong. The distance between the version of me who walked into that conference room 11 weeks ago and the version sitting in this parking garage was measurable. I could feel it. A slight softening of my edges. A new habit of checking my phone. A particular kind of anxiety when he was quiet that I had been explaining away as normal relationship feeling. It was not normal. I understood that now. What do? I said. You don't blow it up tonight. Kezia said practically. You get information first. You find out what his fingerprints actually look like on the Vertex withdrawal and the firm situation. You talk to Dana. I looked at her. I know, she said, but she tried to warn you once. She might do it again. I drove home slowly that evening. I did not respond to Grant's dinner text until 9 that night. I told him I was not feeling well. He replied with a string of warm, attentive messages asking if I needed anything, offering to bring food, telling me to rest, and that he would check on me in the morning. I read every message and felt 2 things at once. The warmth, still there, still real in the way warmth feels real, even when the source is complicated. And underneath it, something new, a clarity that had been trying to find the surface for weeks. The feeling of a woman who has finally stopped smoothing her skirt and started paying attention to why her hands were moving in the first place. I went to bed early. In the morning, I was going to start asking questions I should have asked 6 weeks ago. But first I lay in the dark and let myself feel the full weight of what Kezia had named for me. Because before I could act on it, I needed to grieve it. The version of this story I had been telling myself. The man I thought I had found. The feeling of being finally seen by someone who turned out to be studying me more than seeing me. I let myself feel it completely, and then I set it down, and I started thinking like an attorney. Finding Dana Whitfield did not take long. When you spend 8 years as a corporate attorney, you develop a particular set of research skills that have nothing to do with law school and everything to do with patience and precision. 3 hours on a Friday evening, and I had a full picture. Dana Whitfield, 36, founder of a boutique event planning company based in Houston. For years in Grant's orbit. Engaged to him briefly, a detail that was not on any public profile, but lived quietly in society column from several years back that had never been taken down. Engaged. I sat with that word for a long time. I found her professional email on her company website, and I stared at the blank message for 20 minutes before I typed anything. I did not want to sound like a jealous girlfriend. I did not want to sound like an attorney building a case. I wanted to sound like what I actually was. A woman who had seen 4 words on a phone screen and needed to understand them. I wrote 3 sentences. Simple and direct. My name is Journee Caldwell. I believe you tried to warn me. I'm listening now if you're willing to talk. I sent it before I could rewrite it into something smaller. She responded in 40 minutes. I've been wondering when you'd reach out. Coffee. Saturday morning. I'll send the address. We met at a small cafe in Montrose. She was already there when I arrived, sitting with both hands around a mug, composed in the way of someone who had rehearsed being composed for a long time. Up close, she was quieter than I expected. The polished surface was still there, but underneath it was a tiredness that I recognized because I had started to feel the edges of it myself. She looked at me when I sat down and said, "You're further in than I was when I started asking questions." That's not a criticism. He's better at it now than he was with me. Better at what exactly? I said, making you feel like the exception. She wrapped both hands tighter around the mug. That's the core of it. He finds a woman who is impressive, accomplished, someone with her own world, and he makes her feel like he is the first person who has ever truly seen her inside all of that. Like everyone else saw the achievement, and he sees the person. My throat tightened. And it's not entirely a lie, she continued. That's what makes it so hard to name. He does see you. He's extraordinarily perceptive. He just uses what he sees to build a version of you that needs him. The love bombing, I said. She nodded. Flowers, attention. Showing up, learning your details before you've given them. It feels like devotion. It's actually data collection. He is building a map of everything that makes you feel valued, so that he can be the primary source of all of it. And then the distance, I said. Yes. Once you're attached, the warmth becomes inconsistent, and your system, which has been flooded with all that early intensity, starts working to get back to it. You start adjusting, shrinking things, making yourself more available. And every time you chase the warmth and he provides it again, the attachment gets stronger. I thought about the 4 times I had canceled on Kezia, about the way I had started checking my phone, about the particular anxious quality of the mornings when he went quiet. The workplace thing, I said. Dana exhaled slowly. He did it to me too. Different shape, same structure. He positioned himself inside the professional infrastructure of my life in a way that made it complicated to separate from him. When I eventually tried to end things, the professional fallout was significant. She looked at me steadily. He does not do it consciously every time. That's what I had to accept. Some of it is strategy. Some of it is just how he moves through the world. He gravitates toward control the way other people gravitate toward comfort. It's the same thing to him. Did he love you? I asked. The question sat between us. Yes, she said quietly, in the way he's capable of it, which is real, but it is also conditional and comparative and always, underneath everything, about what you reflect back to him. She looked down at her mug. When I stopped being a version of me that made him feel like the most important force in my life, the warmth left, and it did not come back. I drove home in silence with all of that settling through me like sediment finding the bottom of still water. That evening Grant came over. I had not canceled this time. I had decided I needed to see him with new eyes, now that I understood the shape of the thing, and I needed to see it clearly before I decided what to do next. He brought food. He always brought food when he sensed distance, which was itself a piece of information. He set everything out on my kitchen counter with the easy confidence of a man who knew the space, and he talked about his week, a deal in Atlanta, a problem with a contractor, and he was warm and present and attentive, and I sat on the other side of the kitchen island and watched him the way Grandma Rose had watched him at that Sunday table. And I saw it, not a monster, not a villain, something more complicated than that. A man who had learned very early that love was transactional, that you secured people by becoming indispensable to them, that the way to keep something was to make sure it needed you more than it needed itself. He had built an empire with that instinct, and he had run every significant relationship through the same architecture. He looked up from the food and caught me watching him. "What?" he said, smiling. "How did the vertex withdrawal happen?" I said. "The smile stayed, but something behind it changed. Subtle, the way a light changes behind glass." "What do you mean?" "The pinnacle case. Vertex pulled back in the same window you, and I started seeing each other. Marcus reshuffled my role. Then you brought your Southeast expansion business to my firm." I kept my voice level. "I want to understand how those things connect." He set down what he was holding. "Journee, I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking you a direct question. You're asking me if I interfered in your professional life. Did you?" A pause, long enough to be its own answer. "I made some calls," he said, "to protect us. The optics of you being lead counsel on a case against me while we were together were going to cause problems eventually. I moved things before they could become a problem." I looked at him. "I did it for you," he said. "You made decisions about my career without telling me, and you did it for me. I did it for us." His voice was still calm, still certain, still the voice of a man who was used to his logic being accepted. "You would have had to recuse yourself eventually anyway. I just handled it cleanly. Grant, you removed me from my own case. I protected your reputation. Those are not the same thing." Something shifted in his face then. The warmth did not leave entirely, but it pulled back, the way warmth pulls back when it is deciding whether to become something else. And in that pulling back, I saw what Dana had described, the condition underneath the devotion, the architecture of a man who cared genuinely but could not locate the border between caring and controlling. "You've been talking to someone," he said. His voice had changed. Quieter, more careful. "I talk to a lot of people." "Dana." He said her name and watched my face. I did not flinch. "Yes." He stepped back from the counter, and for the first time in 6 weeks the steadiness in his eyes became something else. Not rage, not cruelty. Something colder than both of those things. The look of a man recalibrating. "Whatever she told you," he said, "needs context. She told me about the engagement, about what happened to her professional situation when she tried to leave, about the pattern." I kept my eyes on his. "She told me he does this every time, and I need to know if she's right." The silence that followed was the longest of our entire relationship. Grant Ashford looked at me across my kitchen, and for the first time the careful, constructed warmth was fully suspended, and I saw the man underneath the presentation. Not monstrous, not hateful, but stripped of performance in a way that was almost unbearable to witness, because underneath it was something young and defended and deeply, stubbornly certain that control was the only safe form of love. "I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you," he said. And the terrible thing was that I believed him. I believed it was true, and I believed it was not enough. "You are not Dana. What we have is not what that was." "Grant, I can do better. I know I went about the firm situation the wrong way. I can see that now that you're saying it." He moved around the counter toward me, and his voice had that quality that had dismantled me 6 weeks ago. Warm, certain, consuming. "Don't do this. Don't let her put something between us that doesn't have to be there." I did not step back, but I did not move toward him either. "I'm not ending this tonight," I said quietly. Something in him relaxed. "But I need you to hear me clearly," I continued. "I am not an acquisition, Grant. I am not a case to be managed or a variable to be controlled. I will not have my professional life touched without my knowledge again. Not ever. And I need you to understand that I see you, not the version you perform. You. And I am standing here anyway. But I will only stay if what stands here with me is actually you and not a version of you that is managing me. He looked at me for a long time. Something moved through his face that I had not seen before, raw and uncomfortable and real. The look of a man who had been seen past his own defenses and did not know what to do with the exposure. Okay, he said, quietly. Just that. Okay, I said back. He did not stay long after that. He left the food. He hugged me at the door with a care that felt different from his usual certainty, like he was holding something fragile and had just understood that it was. I closed the door and leaned against it and breathed. I texted Kezia. I talked to Dana. Then I talked to him. I'm okay. She replied in seconds. You sure? I thought about it honestly. I'm clear, I typed back. That's different from okay, but it's better. She sent back a single word. Good. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark of my apartment and thought about Grandma Rose's voice on the phone that night weeks ago. Asterisk, watch what happens when something else needs to be the most important thing. Watch what he does with that. Asterisk. I had watched. Now I knew. The question that remained was not whether I loved him. I did. In the complicated, clear-eyed way you love someone when you stop performing the love and started just feeling it plainly. The question was whether he was capable of loving me back in a way that left me whole. I did not have the answer yet, but for the first time in 6 weeks, I was asking the right question, and I was asking it as myself. 3 weeks passed after that night in my kitchen. They were different weeks. Quieter. Grant was still present, but the presentation had changed. He was more careful with his words. Less certain. He stopped making plans that overlapped mine without asking first. He stopped sending things to my office unannounced. Small shifts, but I had become precise enough in my attention to notice every one of them. I did not know yet if the shifts were growth or strategy. That was the honest truth. When you have learned that someone is capable of performing devotion, you lose the ability to receive it without measuring it. That is one of the real costs of what had happened between us. Not the drama, not the workplace situation, which I was handling through proper channels with documentation, and a conversation with a managing partner that Marcus had not enjoyed but could not refute. The real cost was the measuring, the way I now held every warm gesture up to the light before I let it land. Kezia said that was healthy, that measuring was not the same as coldness, that a woman who had stopped measuring was a woman who had stopped respecting her own experience. Grandma Rose said nothing when I called her. She just listened to all of it and then said, "Are you eating?" I laughed for the first time in days. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," she said. "Keep your strength." The managing partner meeting resulted in a formal acknowledgement that my reassignment had been handled incorrectly and a restoration of my standing on all accounts, excluding anything with a direct Ashford Group connection, which was fair and which I accepted. Marcus apologized in particular way of men who are sorry they got caught more than sorry they did it. I accepted that too, with the full understanding that my relationship with him would never be what it was. Some things reset. Some things just end, and you work beside the ending. Grant knew about the managing partner meeting. I had told him directly. I had watched his face while I told him, and I had seen discomfort and something that looked genuinely like shame move through him, which was more than I had expected and less than I needed. He said he would make it right with the firm. I told him the firm was my responsibility. He heard that. I watched him hear it. On a Sunday morning 4 weeks after our kitchen conversation, I was at my apartment making breakfast when he knocked. He had not called first, which made me still in the kitchen for a moment before I went to the door. Old habits of attention. He was standing in the hallway with nothing in his hands. No flowers, no food, no gesture designed to manage the atmosphere. Just himself in a plain gray shirt, looking like a man who had not slept particularly well and had come somewhere he needed to be anyway. "Can I come in?" he said. I stepped back from the door. He sat on my couch and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and his hands together, and he looked at the floor for a moment before he looked at me. "I've been talking to someone," he said. "A therapist, for the past 2 weeks." I sat in the chair across from him and waited. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. about control and love being the same thing to me. He looked at his hands. I didn't want to hear it. My first instinct was to find a way to reframe it, to explain why what I did with the firm was actually reasonable. I caught myself doing that for about a week. He paused. And then I stopped and I just sat with what you actually said. And I recognized it, the pattern. I recognized it from before you, from my whole life, honestly. I kept my face still and my chest open, and I listened. I grew up in a house where love left without warning, he said. My mother was there, and then she wasn't. No explanation that made sense to a kid. And I think somewhere in me I decided the only way to keep anything was to make yourself necessary to it, to manage the conditions, so that leaving became too complicated. He exhaled. I told myself it was just how I operated in business, but I do it everywhere. I've done it with everyone. The room was very quiet. I'm not telling you this to fix it tonight, he said. I know it doesn't work like that. I'm telling you because you asked me to show up as myself, and I think this is closer to that than anything I've shown you before. I looked at him across the space between the couch and the chair. The man who had walked into a conference room and taken up more space in my life in 6 weeks than anyone had in years. The man who had sent burgundy roses and pre-time coffee and stood in my doorway with hazel eyes and a certainty that felt like shelter before I understood what was built from. He was not a villain. He had never been a villain. He was a man shaped by his own wounds into patterns that protected him at the expense of everyone close to him. And he was sitting on my couch on a Sunday morning without a single prop or gesture, just his own difficult truth, asking me to see it. Grandma Rose's voice came back to me. When someone really sees you, you don't have to work so hard. I had said that to him on our first date. He had carried it with him. I appreciate you telling me that, I said. But, he said. No, but, I said. I appreciate it completely. He looked at me carefully. I'm not leaving, I said, but I need you to understand what staying looks like from my side. I leaned forward slightly. My career is mine. My friendships are mine. My family is mine. My time is mine. Those things do not get managed or maneuvered or filled in without my knowledge. Not ever. Not for any reason. I understand that. I need you to understand it on a day when it's inconvenient too, I said. Not just a day when things are quiet, when you feel the instinct to control something because you're scared. I need you to feel that instinct and call your therapist instead of acting on it. He held my gaze. That's fair. And if I tell you something is wrong, I need you to hear it the first time, not reframe it, not manage me back to comfortable. Hear it. Yes, he said, quietly, the way he had said okay in my kitchen weeks ago, like a man learning a new language one word at a time. Okay, I said. He looked at me with something open and unfinished in his face, not the consuming certainty of the man who had shown up at my apartment door 11 weeks ago. Something more vulnerable than that, more real. Are we okay? He said. I thought about that honestly. The way I had been thinking about everything honestly for weeks now. We're in progress, I said. That's not a bad thing. That might be the best thing. He almost smiled. I'll take in progress. Good. I stood up. Now I'm making breakfast, and you're welcome to stay if you can sit in this kitchen without reorganizing anything or managing anything or making any decisions about my morning. He laughed, low and warm and surprised out of him, the same way it had been that first dinner when I told him about Grandma Rose. That real laugh that I had filed away somewhere important from the very beginning. I think I can manage that, he said. Interesting word choice, I said. He caught it and shook his head, and the laugh stayed in his eyes as he followed me into the kitchen. We ate breakfast. We talked about ordinary things. At one point, he reached across the table and covered my hand with his, and did not say anything, and I did not move away. It was not perfect. We were not perfect. There would be hard conversations ahead and moments when his old patterns surfaced and moments when my measuring felt like a wall neither of us could fully see around. I knew that. I had no illusions about the work that staying was going to require from both of us. But I was staying as myself, eyes open, feet on solid ground, with a best friend who would tell me the truth, and a mother who saw more than she said, and a grandmother who had known from a single Sunday dinner what kind of man we were dealing with. That afternoon, I called Grandma Rose. She answered on the second ring. "How are you, baby?" she said. "Better," I said. "Clearer." A pause. The kind that meant she was looking out her window the way she always did when she was thinking. "He came to see you today." It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "He came with nothing in his hands." I smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She was quiet for a moment. "A man who comes with nothing in his hands is finally bringing himself," she said. "That's the only thing worth having anyway." Another pause. "Don't let him forget that. And don't you forget it either." "I won't." "Good." I could hear her settling in her chair. "Now tell me you ate something." "I ate, Grandma." With him. A sound that might have been satisfaction. Small and certain the way everything about Grandma Rose was small and certain and utterly immovable. "All right then," she said. And that was enough. That was exactly enough. What would you rate the story? Drop 0 to 10 in the comments right now. If this story moved you, hit subscribe for more emotional journeys every day. And if it truly touched your heart, consider leaving a super thanks. Your support helps us create more stories like this. Every contribution, big or small, means the world. Ready for the next story? It's even more dramatic than this one. Click now. Thank you for being part of this journey.